Finally, it is Sparty Hate Week, next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Carter. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Arbor back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. My partners at Wolverine Digest, Brandon Brown, Michael Spath will be joining us here a little bit later on. But we begin with the next rivalry game. It is Sparty Hate Week. And what I'm about to say may sound like a condemnation of Mark Dantonio, but if you're a Michigan State fan, this is one of the best compliments you could probably receive. See, when I was growing up in Michigan as a kid, I didn't detest. I was always a Michigan fan. All right. Moved there my 5th grade year in 1983, fell in love with the helmets, Steve Smith, Rick Rogers, watched him beat Ohio State the first weekend we lived in Grand Rapids, and I became a Michigan fan ever since. But I grew up, Grand Rapids has a lot of Michigan State support, grew up around a lot of Michigan State fans. When we played one another, there was a rivalry, but the rest of the year, I'd find myself rooting for Michigan State a lot when they weren't playing for Michigan. I'd root for George Perlis's team when they went to the Rose Bowl when I was a freshman in high school, or even in the early years of Tom Izzo, I'd find myself still rooting for them whenever they weren't playing Michigan. Mark Dantonio changed all of that. And you know what? If the goal was to make Michigan fans hate you as much as you hate them, success, it worked. And it wasn't even the success Mark Dantonio had on the field. I think the way that he did it, the style of football, is reminiscent of what's been very successful for Michigan for decades. I think there would have been a lot of respect there, but it was the commentary. It was the moment of silence for Michigan after the Wolverines lost to Appalachian State. It was all the commentary. Pride cometh before the fall. The fact he could not resist the temptation to pour salt in the wound. And after a while, when somebody keeps telling you they hate you, after a while, you just finally believe them. But if we're going to talk about pride coming before the fall, quoting the good book here, Michigan State in 2015 won its last Big Ten championship in a great game against the University of Iowa. Classic Big Ten defensive slobber knocker. Michigan State gets the final drive, drives down to Iowa's goal line. It's 4th and literally an inch and a half, and L.J. Scott carries like the entire Iowa defensive line across the end zone for Michigan State to win the Big Ten title and advance to the college football playoff. And after the game, right down there on the field, Mark Dantonio said, what's your secret? in winning so many of these close games in your coaching career. And he said, I'm not afraid to say it. I think we have the Lord's favor. Well, do not, for Coach Dantonio, if he likes quoting the Bible, don't mind it every once in a while myself. Do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. And a man will always reap what he sows. Case in point, look at these numbers. Now, this is prior to Illinois. All right, but since Mark Dantonio proclaimed that his program has God's favor, 24-23 with 9 losses by 2 touchdowns or more. 9 of them. That's almost a whole season. Multiple players dismissed for sexual assault. He's been subpoenaed and now sued by a former assistant. And your team captain was busted for PEDs. Yikes. And then there's what happened on Saturday against the Illini. Michigan State blowing a 25-point fourth quarter lead to lose. And this video you're watching next to me here was shot by a TV reporter in Lansing. This is ghoulish. I mean, just watching the long, slow walk. And by the way, those uniforms are just putrid. We're taking the long, slow walk back into the locker room with his players. Every once in a while, he gets on them, says, hey, hustle. And you can see a few of the guys do, but the rest of them are just kind of moseying along. That, folks, is the coaching equivalent of you either die the hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Michigan State has a ton of injuries, yes. Almost all of them, though, are on offense. On the defensive side of the football, 3 quarterbacks this season. Michael Penix, now Brandon Peters, Jack Cohn, all had their season best games against that vaunted Michigan State defense. And the program is 4-5, probably going to need to beat Rutgers and Maryland at the end of the year to get to bowl eligibility. All kinds of speculation about Mark Dantonio and his future. It's been a great run for Michigan State, a ton of success. And I'd be lying if I didn't say some of my disgust for the guy has to do with jealousy over the success he had, largely at our expense. But if you're going to throw out there all these kinds of lines and claim a lot of the moral high ground, be very, very careful. Your sins have a way of finding you out. Hey, I want to introduce you to a brand new partner of ours here at Michigan Podcast, Hero Soap Company. Check these guys out. Veteran-owned soap company. Sign up for a subscription and get soap delivered right to your door each and every month. 3 different options, starting at just $5 a month, all the way up to the Battalion package, or as I like to call it, the Buckeye package. 3 bars of soap each month for those Buckeye fans out there who need some extra help getting that stink off. The best part of this is Hero Soap Company donates a portion of each purchase to help veterans and active military, something all of us can unite behind, Wolverines, Buckeyes, Sparties alike. Use the promo code Michigan Podcast and get 10% off of your order. Promo code Michigan Podcast, all one word, and get high quality soap without having to go to the store. Hero Soap Company. Check them out online at herosoapcompany.com. Let freedom clean. Well, let's continue talking about Sparty Hate Week. Brandon Brown, Michael Spath of WTKA-Ann Arbor and the Wolverine Digest join me now. Good to have you back, gentlemen. Let's start with where this rivalry is at, sort of your big picture view of Michigan and Michigan State. And Michael, I'm going to start with you. Go ahead.
Well, Steve, I wish I could say that this rivalry was as exciting as it's been in the past, but with Mark Dantonio, with the Michigan State program 4-5 right now, coming off a really, really embarrassing loss to Illinois, where they gave up a 25-point lead, and Mark Dantonio, a lot of speculation about whether I don't know that this will be his last year. Certainly, from the Michigan State administration side, it doesn't sound like they're in any position or desire to move on from him. But the fans are pretty fed up, and it kind of feels a little bit like the end of the Brady Hoke era, where people are just giving up and don't want to continue on with the current regime. Certainly a different level of success between those two head coaches. But this is where people are with Mark Dantonio. They're so fed up and frustrated with his lack of success lately, what he's done with his coaches. that a guy who led them to unprecedented success, they want to get rid of and start again. And when you've got that going on, when you've got, what's essentially a lame duck head coach, I think it's hard for the rivalry to have that level of excitement that it normally does. On the Michigan side, I mean, sure, it's, people are excited about the way the team's been playing lately, but let's face it, it being this late in November, this game, Michigan's not really playing for anything of consequence. They're not playing for a Big Ten East Division title. They're not playing for a chance to go to Indianapolis. They're not playing for a college football playoff. They're playing for pride. They're playing for state bragging rights. They're playing for, just to finish the season strong and to maybe end up in a near Six Bowl, the Rose Bowl ideally. So, I hadn't thought about it too much at first, the fact that they're playing so late in November, but I really don't like it. I think they should be playing this game in mid to late October, because I think there's going to be much more on the line for both teams.
Michael, back to you for a second. Where did this go wrong with them? You're talking about one of the great coaching jobs in modern Big Ten history, whether we like him or not. The record is what it is. He's absolutely going to be in the College Football Hall of Fame. And but more often than not, great coaches end like this. Most of the time, they don't end with you getting carried off the field after beating the Heisman Trophy winner and Urban Meyer in a bowl game. Most of the time, whether it's Mac Brown at Texas, just pick names, most of the time it ends with NCAA probation, Pete Carroll, or it ends like this. What's happened there? Why did it change so fast, where since 2015, this program is just, a 500 program? How did this happen, do you think?
There are two things that really stand out to me. One is Pat Narduzzi leaving, and I don't know exactly what year. I think that was 2013 or 2014 when he left to become the head coach at Pitt. And when that happened, you thought that Dantonio was this brilliant defensive mind. I think he is a very good, but I think they lost a little bit of their edge without Narduzzi as a defensive coordinator. I think that's one part of it. I think the second part of it, and I've kind of diminished this aspect of it, because I've always said, like, hey, you know what, Michigan didn't get, they didn't take those victories away from Michigan when they were beating up on Bobby Williams or John L. Smith or any of the buffoons that were running Michigan State. You don't take away those victories. But let's face it, I mean, when Mark Dantonio rose up, it was Rich Rodriguez, it was Brady Hoke. At Penn State, it was, the end of the Joe Pa era, then the sanctions, then Bill O'Brien, who only stuck around for 2 years before bolting. It was a James Franklin, who in his first 2 seasons was kind of overwhelmed by everything that was going on at Penn State. So I think there's a lot of truth to the fact that when Michigan State had its dominant run, at least 2 out of the 3 other Big Ten East powers, Penn State and Michigan, were really down and weren't challenging him on the football field, weren't challenging him on the recruiting trail. And since those things have happened, and then losing Narduzzi, I don't think he's been able to have the same level of recruit the same level of athlete. I think it's also harder when you've had as much success as Michigan State has had, winning multiple Big Ten titles, beating Michigan the way that they were, going to college football playoff. How do you walk into a locker room and say, hey, guys, we need to put a chip on our shoulder because everybody's disrespecting us? At some point, when you've had a lot of success and you get respect from the media, you get respect from the fans, you can't play the disrespect card anymore. You've got to be someone other than Rodney Dangerfield. And I don't know that Mark Dantonio has ever done a decent job transitioning from Rodney Dangerfield to, Mike Tyson or to any boxing legend that's been very good that has enjoyed a reign on the top. I mean, that's hard to do when you're the hunted, and I don't think he's done a good job ever being the hunted.
Well, Michigan fans, we like to talk about Tom Izzo has his success because he took advantage of the Ed Martin scandal, and maybe that helped him launch his program. But in the 10 years that he went head-to-head against John Beilein, Tom Izzo actually averaged more wins a season than he did the 10 years before John Beilein arrived, meaning he met the challenge of John Beilein. What you have seen with Mark Dantonio is the exact opposite. Once Michigan got its poop together and got its stuff straight, you have seen a precipitous decline in his program, not what we saw with Tom Izzo in men's basketball. Brandon, what's your view of the state of the rivalry, kind of big picture right now?
Yeah, I mean, it does feel a little different than it has in the past. I mean, like Mike said, we talked about it on the radio today, and, it just kind of, I don't know, you always had the sense that you were going to get a scrappy Michigan State team and that, no matter what was going on with the two programs, that Michigan State might come into Ann Arbor and beat Michigan, or Michigan's going to have the toughest match they've had all year going to East Lansing. And it doesn't feel like that this year. I mean, like, it really feels like Michigan might pound them on Saturday, and I don't remember feeling that way about this matchup in a long time. And for all the reasons that Mike listed, whether it's the perception of the program and Mark Dantonio hasn't been able to play the card that he used to play, or it's Jim Harbaugh's presence in Ann Arbor, it's a lack of recruiting, it's Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State going to an even another level. There's been a lot of things that have kind of led to this, but a 6-6 finish, I mean, I don't know. I say all this, but then you think like, oh yeah, a couple years ago they went 3-9. But even then, even during that 3-9 season, it didn't quite feel like this. Like I don't remember it feeling like Dantonio's done. The team is falling apart. They don't have the same belief in themselves that they always used to.
Yeah.
And when you ask the fans, I feel like it's the same way. I was telling Mike today on the radio, I'm from about an hour and a half north of here, so there's in Ann Arbor, there are no Michigan State people in Ann Arbor to speak of, but where I grew up, there are. And a lot of those buddies of mine were a lot more vocal the last 6 or 7 years than they are now. And it just there feels like there's a big paradigm shift in what's really going on in this rivalry. It's always going to be heated on the field, but I think a lot of the noise surrounding it is a lot more subdued than it has been in the last couple of years. And I think it does kind of signal the end of the Mark Dantonio era. And I can't exactly say that it's a shame because I'm not a big fan of the guy, but he's done some great things for that program, and it just seems to be like he's kind of letting that slip away. He's kind of letting it crumble right out from underneath him, and it's not sad to me, but I'm sure the people who wear green and white aren't too happy about it.
I think the biggest shock is what's happened to them defensively. And, this was the first game without Joe Bashi when he tested positive for PEDs. They're all Big Ten linebacker. But they really haven't had serious injuries on that side of the ball all season. It's been the same front four guys all year. Willikis, the Panashik brothers, the big fella in the middle. They've had the same defensive front that they had last year that was so good. And yet, when you look at Michael Penix, when you look at Brandon Peters, when you look at Jack Cohn, 3 Big Ten quarterbacks had their season passing high game against Michigan State this season, which means not a lot of pressure. They weren't constantly being harassed. I mean, I think that's the big shock to me. I mean, Josiah Scott's considered, an early entry candidate for the NFL draft next year. We already mentioned Joe Bashi, that front four. They have stars at each level on that side of the football. It's been their calling card, Brandon. But except for that season opener against, I think it was Tulsa, when they held them like minus 70 yards rushing or whatever it was, this unit has been as disappointing as any unit in college football this season, given its personnel. What's happened there?
Yeah, I don't know. In fact, you kind of pointed out some things that I didn't really realize. I mean, I know Michigan State, being in the area, listening to the sports talk radio shows on other channels, and the few Michigan State people that you do run into, they're constantly talking about how bad they've been hurt by the injury bug. But to your point, it's been on offense. So I don't have an explanation for that. I mean, with as good as they've looked in recent years, especially last year, and what they were expected to be this year, that's a head scratcher, and I'm sure that's something that, that Mark Dantonio is sitting up at night, like wondering what the hell happened, what went wrong, why isn't this unit working as well as it's supposed to? I don't have an answer. I really don't. I don't know enough about the ins and outs of their season, what they've done, who they've faced. I mean, you rattled off several quarterbacks there who have had big days. That's cause for concern, especially considering that Michigan's going to be at home. They're going to want to send a message, I think, this weekend. Is this the weekend Shea Patterson finally throws for 300 yards? I don't know. It hasn't happened yet. It's been one of my season predictions about 4 times, and I've gotten it wrong every time. So I probably won't be putting that on my list this weekend. But yeah, that is a shocker, and it's something that without taking a deep dive into each game and kind of looking at what went wrong in the game plan and the approach by the other team offenses, that I don't know. I flat out don't know how it can take a step back like that when it was so good last year, and in theory should have been better this year.
You have any theories on the defensive side of the football? What happened to them, Michael? 3 Big Ten quarterbacks having their season best games against a Michigan State defense And there haven't been really any serious injuries there. They've been pretty healthy on that side of the football with most of their regulars that are household names all season long, and now they're blowing a 25-point lead to Brandon Peters in Illinois. What do you think's happened on that side of the football?
I think a lot of it is depth, honestly. I mean, that's one of the real problems of the last couple of years for Michigan State is they haven't been able to recruit very well. They relied so much on developing, but at some point, you can't just develop every single guy and continue to win at the highest level. And I think their lack of depth at all three levels of the line, the linebackers, and the secondary has put those guys in positions where they're getting tired. And I think the other part is their offense has been so dreadful. And how many times have you seen a defense? If you've got a bad offense, how many times have you seen a defense be able to sustain its level of play for the entire season? Generally, they kind of get worn down, especially emotionally and mentally, and then you see them start to falter a little bit. I think that's what's happened a lot of with Michigan State is when you're carrying the water all the time, at some point you drop the water and you don't want to pick it up again, and you're too tired to pick it up. And I think that's a lot of what's going on here with the Spartans this year.
Well, if you go back and you trace what was the series of unfortunate events here, it's the 2016 recruiting class. After they went to the playoff in 2015, all the hype of Jim Harbaugh, I think they got outside themselves. They went for a recruiting splash. I think it was the highest rated class of the Dantonio era. And that was the Austin Robertson class. That was the class of the Detroit kids that got in trouble with the sexual assaults. That recruiting class was absolutely decimated to nearly nothing. And that has killed their depth. Those guys would be juniors and seniors on this year's team. It's killed their depth the last couple of years. It brought scandal to the university. It's why they ended up losing KJ Hamler. And I just think they've never recovered from that class. I think that's kind of, that's their Rich Rod hiring moment, if you will, was the 2016 recruiting class. But let's get to Michigan. And I mentioned, and Brandon, you've already alluded to it. I mentioned 3 quarterbacks. A couple of them pretty modest passing stats in Jack Cohn and Brandon Peters. Brandon Peters went into the game against Michigan State like 109th in the country in QBR. Threw for 369 yards, and that was with one of his wide receivers, his starting receivers, got hurt in the middle of that game. So we have Jack Cohn. We have seen since the Michigan State game, every Wisconsin opponent has said Jack Cohn has to beat us. He's been unable to do it. They lost 2 of them and nearly lost to Iowa, but except for stopping them on a 2-point conversion. So, Michael Penix has been pretty good, but he completed 20 passes in a row against Michigan State's defense. So you look at what Jaden Daniel, his first road start as a collegian, came out to Michigan State under pressure on a 4th down, converts, and Arizona State beats Michigan State. We have seen them struggle against quarterbacks that, with the exception of Penix, have kind of put up very pedestrian, frankly, Shea Patterson-like numbers. In fact, Brian Lewerke's QBR is 9 points or 9 places higher than Shea Patterson's. So does Michigan have the ability to exploit that? Or will the coaches look at the weather forecast of maybe right at freezing temperatures and just say, pound the rock and, try to win it with a running game and a defense? What do you think, Brandon?
Well, I know earlier this year we talked about this exact topic, and this was when, man, how things have changed. This was when we thought Michigan State's front 7 was going to be absolutely dominant. Then when we thought Michigan was going to be employing speed and space and throwing the ball around different receivers. Well, now we're here, and Michigan State's defense hasn't been all that great, and Michigan has no speed and space to speak of. So I thought that Michigan would be able to finally get the ball to its better athletes. Michigan has always recruited better than Michigan State, always had more naturally gifted athletes, but never really utilized them. Instead, ran right into the teeth of the Michigan State defense and right into their strength, which was we're going to try to run the ball. It's going to be power, and it turned into a slugfest. And so I thought this would be the year Josh Gaddis is going to dial things up. Michigan's going to get all this speed out in the middle of the field. Michigan State's not going to know what to do. It's at home. Big win for Michigan. Well, now I'm thinking it looks more like Michigan is going to try to run the ball, but Michigan State's defense hasn't been quite as good. So maybe they can actually establish the ground game and actually run the ball with some effectiveness with Hassan Haskins Zach Charbonnet. Maybe Shea Patterson pulls it a couple more times and gets some big runs on the edge. And I still think the wide receivers need to be involved. It's just like we talked about before the bye week. Michigan needed to air it out against Maryland and work on some things that they're going to need to keep pace with Ohio State. They didn't do that. Maybe they can against Michigan State, against a team that's been giving up big-time passing numbers like you've already explained. But it's crazy to think that we're going into like the final quarter of the season, and I still don't really know exactly what Michigan wants to do on offense. I mean, I think they want to run the ball, but to the points I just made, maybe they're thinking, okay, we have a better advantage in the passing game than we do in the running game, and they want to still try to do some of the elements that we thought we'd see more of. I don't know. I think Michigan will be able to run the ball. I don't think they'll be able to run it like they have, maybe against Notre Dame or even against Maryland. But I think they're going to want to run the ball. They've proven that that's what they want to do. Patterson needs to have a good game. I would love to see him eclipse 300 yards for the first time in his Michigan career. And I think Michigan could really run away with it. I see that being a possibility. Michigan State is reeling. They've just been dealt another big injury blow. Matt Dotson is out for the season with a torn Achilles. They're starting tight end. So they've got a lot of pieces missing on offense. Brian Lewerke, I'm not convinced is 100%. I know a couple of their receivers have been out there trotting guys out there we've never heard of. So if Michigan can jump out early at home, it could get ugly. But I really don't know exactly what they're going to try to enforce on the offensive side of the ball still, even 10 games into the season.
Michael, you're probably going to join me in being very skeptical that Michigan's coaches, when it's 30 degrees at kickoff on Saturday, are going to have Shea Patterson air it out in that thick, cold air and his maybe above average arm strength. Are you joining me in that skepticism?
Well, I would just say, I think we know what Michigan wants to be. I think the Notre Dame game perfectly encapsulated what this program is all about. And even in all the offseason talk about what they're going to become, they have reverted back to what they were from 2015 to 2018, and that's a team that relies heavily on running the football and man ball and overpowering defensive lines. And as we've seen, it's good enough to win you 9-10 games a year, and it's a doubling down on what they did a year ago with a couple of new elements, with a little bit. I mean, we've seen just a tiny fraction of speed and space the last couple of games, but they don't have a quarterback that can throw it on the field with strong play action. They don't have a quarterback that exploits the middle of the field very much. They just don't have a quarterback that they trust. And so, if that's the case, then I know Brandon's talking about, well, maybe this will be the game he gets 300 yards. Brandon, I got news for you. He ain't getting 300 yards in any game this season unless the wheels absolutely come off and they're down by 21 points in the second half, like we saw at Penn State.
I think it's possible he won't throw for 300 yards this month, and that's not a hot take. Depending on you're sitting there with 9 inches of snow on the ground in Ann Arbor right now. If it's going to be that kind of November, he's not throwing for 300 yards this month.
No, he'll throw for 300 yards this month, but he won't. It won't be a 280-yard game or anything like that. I think they've figured out that their best playmakers, the ones that they trust the most, are those 5 offensive linemen and the 2 running backs, and that's what they're going to do. And it's going to be. You know what? I don't want to say it's going to be a waste, because if they can find a way to win 3 games here, well then, everybody will be smiling and happy and content. But if they don't, then we'll look back and go, well, this was a year where they had 3 wide receivers, 4 wide receivers, as good as any in the country, and they didn't know how to use them, and they didn't figure out how to use them. What a waste. But I guess we'll see. I mean, like I said, they're doubling down on this Notre Dame tactic that they used against Ohio State a year ago. It didn't work against Ohio State last year. Will it work against Ohio State this year? We're going to find out in a couple of weeks. And if it does, then all of us can eat crow and happily do it. And if it doesn't, then we're all going to look like the smartest 3 guys in the room.
Well, let me say this. I approve of the offensive shift they have made. I said this after the Wisconsin game, that either they needed to go all in with this, or Jim needed to take back the offense to some form of what had worked previously. If they would have stuck with where the path they were going, the season was going to implode. I mean, they had to, the patient was bleeding out, Michael. They had to stabilize the patient. Now, you and I would agree the likelihood of doing this successfully against Ohio State, unless you're +3 in turnovers, which could happen, crazier things have happened, but the likelihood of controlling the line of scrimmage without getting some turnover, help from Ohio State and having this end any differently than the previous 4, probably not high. But we wouldn't have even gotten to the point of even talking about that game with the offensive path they were on coming out of September. Right? And who knows what happened in fall camp and spring ball. The install was bad, as Nick Baumgartner at the Athletic, has ascertained. We'll never know. None of us were there, but it's pretty clear that whatever they thought they were going to be or hoped they were going to be, they weren't. So I think this move they've made has saved their season. It stopped the bleeding.
Yeah, no, I completely understand and agree with that. I mean, if they would have been a team that would have been, let's say this, if they rolled out the game plan that they had against Army, where they were trying to throw the football more and they couldn't do it, and they didn't establish the running game, and they did that against Iowa, which they struggled with offensively overall, but if that was really what they tried to do, and if they tried to do that against Notre Dame, and they even maybe try to do that against Illinois, they'd probably have 2 more losses on their schedule and maybe a third. And then we'd be, all up in arms, and Josh Gaddis probably wouldn't have a job right now, and Jim Harbaugh would be severely being questioned what the future of the Michigan program is. And so you're right, Steve. I mean, they turned to something that they trust, something that they know, and it has put them in a position where they can still have a very good November and a very good finish to the season. And it should be good enough with the way that the defense is playing to beat Michigan State this week, even to go on the road and beat Indiana if the defense continues to play the way that it has. And then we're all going to find out. We're all going to find out if it'll be good enough to beat Ohio State. And, we can sit here and talk all we want right now, like, oh, we don't think it's going to be, or this is, they're going to get blown out, or this is going to be laughable when they try to. But none of us really know, because none of us know how much further this offense has progressed from a year ago quite yet. So I don't know. I guess the message to take away is I'm holding out a little bit of hope for the rest of the season, and like the old fingers crossed type of thing, and we'll see what happens.
Final question for both of you. Brandon, I'll start with you. When we reconvene a week from now and look back on the Michigan State game, what do each of you think is going to be the big talking point coming out of that game? Brandon, I'll start with you.
Oh man, I actually think that Michigan's going to win pretty handily. I just have a sense that the way Michigan State's season has gone, it's like I said, especially if Michigan can jump out early. I don't think this is going to be one of those ones where Michigan State finds it in themselves to dogfight, from a deficit. If they can hang around and Michigan struggles to move the ball and settles for field goals and doesn't get touchdowns, then maybe. But I think if Michigan can jump out early, even 10-0, 14-0, I think it's going to be over quick. And so I think we might really be talking about Mark Dantonio being 2 games away from the end of his Michigan State career. And I think it'll be much louder chatter than we're already hearing. And I think it'll have Michigan fans feeling like we just talked about, that the season is, I don't know if salvageable is the word, but they'll be feeling pretty good about how Michigan looked against the Spartans, and then have some more confidence heading into the final game of the year with a tough Indiana game to not overlook. But I really think the way that it's played out through this many games, how Michigan State has, crumbled in a couple of matchups that you just didn't see them do in the past, that if Michigan can pound them a little bit, it might be the knockout blow. Even though they'll have a couple games left, I think it might pretty much be the end of the era for Mark Dantonio.
Michael, same question to you to wrap it up.
I think we're going to be talking about the Michigan defense. I think the comparison between what Michigan State used to be defensively, what Michigan is now, I think we're going to be talking about how good of a spot we feel Michigan's defense is, and that if Michigan's going to pull off 2 more wins at the end of the season and pull off the upset against Ohio State, it's going to come down to how good the defense has looked over the, really we can go back to since the start of October, save 2 or 3 plays that I think all of us blame on Don Brown and don't blame on the actual athletes against Penn State. And so I think we'll be talking about the defense, and I think we'll you'll have half the fan base wringing their hands that they still haven't developed anything with the passing game, and half the fan base saying, hey, look, their approach is their approach, as we just talked about the last couple of minutes, and it's going to be good enough to beat the Buckeyes. But I agree with Brandon. I think that after this game, if they go out there and do what a lot of people are expecting them to do, there's going to be a palpable excitement about the last 2 games of the season and the potential to end this streak against Ohio State and to draw even, at least for this year, with the Buckeyes.
Good stuff, both of you. I agree with both of you there at the end. And I too think it's going to be the defense, Michael. You give Don Brown a wounded or stationary opponent, and he is vicious. And I think you'll see that unleashed against Michigan State on Saturday, especially with their depleted wide receiver core. I think we're going to see the old Don Brown, a lot of man-to-man. Just saying, hey, we just don't believe you can make those throws. You don't have a KJ Hamler. You don't have an Ohio State receiving core. We just don't believe you can make those throws. So it'll be fascinating to see how Michigan State responds to that. Good stuff, both of you. Thanks for joining us again this week on Michigan Podcast, and go Blue.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Steve.
Michigan Podcast brought to you by Wolverine Digest, now part of Sports Illustrated. That's right, the SI.com network. That's myself, Steve Deace, Michael Spath, and Brandon Brown, bringing you tons of content each and every day at WolverineDigest.com, and it's all free. Analysis, video, commentary, breakdowns, everything you need to be an informed Michigan fan. You're going to get it every single day at WolverineDigest.com. And keep in mind, we don't require access to the program in order for us to generate content. So we give you unvarnished, unfiltered analysis. Yes, we're Michigan fans. We want Michigan to do well, but we don't see it any other way other than calling balls and strikes, and that includes the home team too. Go to WolverineDigest.com now. This week's Twitter poll, we asked you, will this be the last time Mark Dantonio? I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. I know, it's a bad Steve. I'm sorry. I know. I try to keep it above board as much as we can, but, don't forget, I'm still a fan. All right, let's try it again. Will this be the last time Mark Dantonio coaches against Michigan? 61% of you said yes. 39% of you said no. I don't know. They got that longevity bonus we talked about. They're not going to want to pay that if they're, but he ain't walking away from that. So they're going to have to fire him, which means a buyout. I don't think the administration there, I don't know. I think it's kind of 50-50 right now. If this is the last time we see Mark Dantonio, certainly if Michigan State were to win, it won't be. But if Michigan State loses, as most people expect, then could be a very interesting next few weeks up there in East Lansing. Let's get to this week's question of the week from David Droz, who says, hypothetically, if Michigan runs Sparty out of the stadium, is MSU football back to where they began when Dantonio started? Seems like pride comes before the fall, don't you think? Well, that's a reference to something we talked about already in the program. There, the pride cometh before the fall line from the Bible that Mark Dantonio once used when talking about Michigan. Yes. In fact, I would say Michigan State football is kind of back to where they started when Dantonio took over right now. The whole season made by whether they can beat Michigan or not. I mean, that's pretty much what Michigan State football was before he arrived. And if you're a Sparty fan watching this, you should take our disdain for him to be one of the greatest compliments he has ever received. Because, as I mentioned at the top of the show, when I was growing up in Michigan, there was not this constant hatred between the two. It was a rivalry, yeah. But Michigan fans didn't disdain Michigan State, certainly not to the level Michigan State fans would often disdain them. Mark Dantonio changed that with what he did both on and off the field. No doubt he's a Hall of Famer, but the program has devolved already, David. It's already at the point now where it's Michigan's our whole season. Winning that game determines if we're successful or not. This is not a program that contends for championships anymore, and I don't think it will be, whether he's the coach or not, for the foreseeable future, given what's going on in the rest of the Big Ten. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Hopefully, Next week at this time, we're talking about a big win over Sparty and looking ahead to Indiana, maybe even a big basketball win tonight against Creighton as well. Want to thank all of you for tuning in. Don't forget, if you're watching, listening, whether it's YouTube right here or iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, if you could like, subscribe, 5-star review, whichever is available to you and whichever method you use to access our program, we would very much appreciate you for doing that. Want to also thank our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast who helps to spread the word about what we do here each week as well. Until next week, go Blue.